In a village where palm trees swayed like dancers, lived a young man named Edom. Every morning, he would climb the tallest palms to collect sweet palm wine. The rope hung over his shoulder like a royal sash, and his chest puffed with pride. Women in the marketplace would call out his name, praising his skill and handsome face. Their words tasted sweeter than the palm wine itself. Edom would swagger through the village square, head held high, believing every compliment. "I am the king of women," he would declare, throwing his arms wide. "Every maiden in this village dreams of me." The other young men rolled their eyes, but the women giggled behind their hands. Edom's confidence grew bigger each day, like a balloon filling with hot air. He spent his evenings boasting at the palm wine bar, telling stories of his conquests and dreams of marriage. The older men shook their heads, remembering their own foolish youth. "That boy talks too much," whispered the grandmother selling cola nuts. Pride comes before the fall. But Edom didn't listen to whispers. He was too busy listening to his own voice. Beyond the village, in the deep forest where ancient trees stood like guardians, something stirred in the shadows and began to take notice. One morning, Edom walked to the stream to fill his gourd with fresh water. The path wound through thick bushes and flowering trees that hummed with bees. Birds called from every branch, creating nature's own music. At the bend in the stream, where the water moved slowly and clear, he saw her. A young woman stood by the water's edge, her face covered by a delicate veil. She wore a simple dress that seemed to shimmer like moonlight on water. Her movements were graceful, like a gazelle drinking at dawn. She smelled of rain on dry leaves and something else, something wild and mysterious that made his heart race. "Good morning, beautiful one," Edom called out, using his most charming voice. The maiden looked up, her eyes lowered shyly. When she spoke, her voice was soft like wind through grass. "Good morning, palm wine tapper." They talked by the stream as the sun climbed higher. She spoke little, but each word was like honey. Edom found himself more enchanted than he had ever been. "Will you marry me?" he asked before the morning was over, his usual confidence making him bold. The maiden smiled beneath her veil. "If that is your wish." But in the trees above them, leaves rustled without any wind. Edom rushed back to the village, his heart singing louder than the birds. He announced his engagement to everyone who would listen. The other young men laughed, thinking it was another of his boasts. "Where is her family?" asked his mother, stirring the evening soup. "Who are her people?" "She will tell me in time," Edom replied, though he realized he hadn't thought to ask. The wedding day arrived quickly. Drums echoed through the village, but something felt strange. No aunties came bearing gifts of salt and palm oil. No uncles arrived with cola nuts and wise proverbs for the young couple. "Where are her relatives?" whispered the village women, looking around the gathering. Edom shrugged off their questions. "Love needs no crowd," he declared. The bride arrived wearing the same shimmering dress, her face still veiled. The ceremony proceeded, but the elder women traded uneasy glances. They had never seen a wedding without the bride's family present. As the drums played, the bride remained silent and still. She nodded when asked if she took Edom as her husband, but her voice was barely a whisper. When the ceremony ended and the couple walked to their new home, several guests noticed something odd. The bride cast no shadow in the bright afternoon sun. The morning after the wedding, Edom woke early to prepare for his daily palm wine collection. His new wife lay sleeping on the mat beside him, looking peaceful and beautiful. Outside, he prepared to leave but noticed something peculiar in the soft earth around their hut. His own footprints from the night before were clear, pointing away from the house toward the village. But his wife's footprints were different. They faced toward the house, not away from it. It looked as if she had walked backward to their home, never turning around. Edom scratched his head, thinking perhaps she had returned from somewhere during the night. When he came back from the palm trees, he found his wife in their small compound. She was feeding birds from her palm, scattering grains with gentle movements. The birds showed no fear, perching on her arms and shoulders like old friends. "You should eat first," Edom suggested. Then feed the birds. His wife smiled softly. The birds are hungry too. They have been waiting all night. She fed every last bird before taking a single bite of her own breakfast. The old women of the village watched from their doorways, whispering among themselves. They spit twice into the dust, an old gesture to confuse any spirits that might be listening. Something about the new bride made them very, very nervous. Within days of his marriage, Edom noticed his luck had changed dramatically. His palm wine gourds filled faster than ever before. The sweet sap sang as it dripped from his knife cuts, and his waist rope never felt heavy no matter how much he carried. Where other tappers struggled to fill 2 gourds, Edom easily filled 6. The wine was sweeter, clearer, and more golden than anyone had ever tasted. My fortunes doubled the day her head touched my mat, he boasted in the village square, his chest puffed with pride. The other palm wine tappers looked at their own meager harvests with envy. Women began buying only from Edom, leaving the others with unsold wine. "What's your secret?" asked his friend Okon, counting his few copper coins. Edom winked and tapped his nose. "A good wife brings good fortune." But the jealous murmurs in the village grew thicker each day. The unsuccessful tappers whispered that something unnatural was helping Edom. Their wives began to eye his bride with suspicion and spite. In the evening, when the talking drum usually beat with celebration, its rhythm seemed slower, more cautious. The drummer himself didn't understand why his hands moved differently. It was as if the drum was trying to warn the village about something they couldn't yet see. That night, as they lay on their sleeping mat under the stars, Edom's wife spoke more than she ever had before. Her voice was gentle but serious, like a teacher explaining important lessons. "My husband," she said, "I must ask 3 things of you. They are important for our happiness." Edom rolled over to face her, interested. In the moonlight, her eyes seemed to reflect light like a cat's. "First," she continued, "never again call yourself king of women. That boast offends the spirits who guard us." Edom chuckled. "If you say so, my dear." "Second, never light a lamp after midnight when I wash my hair. The darkness is sacred during that time." "Of course," he agreed easily. "Third, never call me by any name you do not truly know, not even in anger or jest. Names have power, and wrong names can break things that should not be broken." Edom nodded and swore he would obey all 3 rules. They seemed simple enough. But as his wife smiled and settled down to sleep, Edom thought he saw something strange in her eyes. For just a moment, they reflected the leaves of trees that were not in their small room. In the darkness around their hut, 3 invisible ropes seemed to tie themselves together, binding his promises to something much larger than marriage. The next market day brought trouble that Edom didn't expect. The jealous village girls, angry about his mysterious success, decided to test his strange wife. As the bride knelt by her mortar to grind millet, several girls scattered salt near her workspace. The crystals hissed and crackled like drops of water on hot stones, but the bride continued grinding calmly. One bold girl tried to snip a coil of hair from the bride's head when she wasn't looking. But as her knife touched the hair, the dark strand twisted around her wrist like a living vine. The girl yelped and dropped her blade, shaking her hand until the hair released her. That evening, Edom and his wife found a tiny snake sleeping peacefully on their doorstep. It was no bigger than a finger, with scales that shimmered green and gold. "Should I kill it?" Edom asked, reaching for his knife. "No," his wife said softly, kneeling beside the little creature. "It's just resting." She whispered something in a language Edom didn't recognize. The snake raised its small head, looked at her with bright eyes, then slithered away into the bushes. The village elders who witnessed this exchange muttered among themselves as they walked home. "Mind your lamps," they warned their families. "Strange things are stirring." Days passed peacefully until Edom's pride began to swell again. His gourds remained heavy with the sweetest wine, and compliments from customers made him forget his wife's warnings. Standing in the village square with his full gourds gleaming in the sun, Edom couldn't resist the old boast. "Who owns the beds of women in this village?" he called out with a wide grin, his voice carrying across the marketplace. The moment the words left his mouth, the talking drum's rhythm changed. Instead of its usual rich, deep notes, it suddenly sounded flat and lifeless, like beating on hollow wood. Edom's wife, grinding millet at their compound, stopped her work. She didn't look up, but her hands grew still on the grinding stone. The other villagers felt the change too. A strange silence fell over the market, as if the very air had grown thick and heavy. That evening, Edom's wine tasted slightly bitter for the first time since his marriage. When he mentioned it to his wife, she simply said, "Some sweetness requires humility to maintain." He didn't understand her words, but something in her tone made him uncomfortable. The drum continued its flat, warning rhythm all through the night, but Edom was too proud to recognize what it was trying to tell him. 2 weeks later, Edom completely forgot the second taboo. Past midnight, he heard the gentle sound of water being poured. His wife was washing her long, dark hair outside their hut. The water smelled of crushed leaves and rain-soaked earth. The taboo whispered in his memory, "No lamp after midnight when she washes her hair," but his curiosity was stronger than his promise. Quietly, Edom struck his flint and lit their small oil lamp. The flame leaped to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For just one heartbeat, the shadows looked wrong. They seemed to have antlers like a forest deer, and moss appeared to crawl across the floor. His wife's silhouette looked taller, wilder, more ancient than human. Then the oil lamp sputtered and died, as if invisible fingers had pinched out the flame. Darkness rushed back into the room, but now it felt different, heavier, more alive. Edom's heart pounded as he realized the darkness seemed to remember what he had seen. His wife returned to bed without a word, but her skin felt cool like river stones, and when she breathed, he smelled the deep forest after rain. Sleep did not come easily to Edom that night, and when it did, he dreamed of trees with eyes. The next morning brought the first sign that his fortune was changing. Birds forgot to sing their usual dawn chorus. When Edom climbed his first palm tree, the spadix tasted like burned yam instead of sweet sap. Tree after tree stood dry and silent, his knife clinking against bark that yielded nothing. He climbed higher, cut deeper, waited longer, but the palms gave him nothing. Other tappers were having normal harvests, but Edom's trees had turned stubborn overnight. By noon, his gourds remained empty. His customers waited in the market, but he had nothing to sell. He staggered home, his face pale with worry and exhaustion. The successful morning routine he'd enjoyed for weeks had vanished like mist. His wife sat calmly weaving a basket, her hands moving in steady, practiced motions. "The trees are dry today," Edom said, hoping for sympathy. She looked up with those mysterious eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "When a taboo is a rope," she said quietly, "pride is the knife that cuts it." Her words made no sense to him, but they filled his stomach with cold stones. For the first time since their marriage, Edom began to wonder who he had really brought into his home. The jealous villagers saw Edom's sudden failure and began to mock him openly. "What happened to the great king of women?" they laughed. "Can't your mysterious wife help you now?" Their words stung like bee stings, and Edom's pride flared hot and angry. Instead of staying quiet, he decided to prove himself again. That afternoon, he stood in the village square with an empty gourd raised high. "I invite all mothers and daughters to see that I remain the greatest palm wine tapper in this village," he declared. "Tomorrow I will fill 10 gourds to prove my worth." The wind suddenly grew hard and cold. The ridge of palm trees that surrounded the village bent low under its force and seemed unable to rise again. Edom's boast hung in the air like smoke, but instead of cheers, it was met with uncomfortable silence. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Dogs slunk away with their tails between their legs. Even the market sellers began packing their goods, though the day was still young. His wife appeared at the edge of the square, watching with sad eyes. As Edom walked home, he noticed his footsteps echoed strangely, as if he was walking through an empty cave instead of on solid ground. The boast he meant to inspire had instead curdled in the dust like spoiled milk. That night, the village fell into an unnatural silence. No crickets chirped their evening songs. Geckos held their breath on the walls. Even the wind stopped moving through the trees. Edom woke in the darkness feeling that something had changed in his very bed. The sleeping mat felt different beneath him, braided and woven like tree roots. The floor was cool and damp like river stones, though it had been dry earth when he went to sleep. He reached out to touch his wife, and his fingers found her hand. But when he looked down in the faint starlight, her feet didn't quite touch the ground. She hovered just above the sleeping mat, as if the earth itself was gently holding her up. Fear crept up Edom's spine like a cold snake. He wanted to ask questions, demand answers, shake her awake and confront her about all the strange things he'd been seeing. But pride and fear warred in his throat, and both kept his mouth closed. He swallowed his questions along with his pride, knowing somehow that speaking would make everything worse. His wife continued sleeping peacefully, breathing like wind through leaves, while Edom lay awake wondering what he had invited into his life. The silence pressed down on the village like a heavy blanket all through the long, long night. The next morning, 3 elder women appeared at Edom's door. Their faces were serious, lined with wisdom and worry. "Sit," said the oldest woman, pointing to the shade of a large neem tree. "We must speak with you." Edom obeyed, his stomach tight with nervousness. "You have pulled something into your room," the second woman said, her voice low and careful. "And now it has pulled back." The third woman leaned forward. "Strange things happen around your wife. Birds trust her too much. Salt hisses near her. Her footprints face the wrong direction." "What are you saying?" Edom asked, though part of him already knew. "Go to the shrine," the first woman instructed. "Visit the diviner and listen with your mouth closed. Learn what lives in your house before it decides what to do with you." The women stood to leave, but the oldest one turned back. "Pride opened a door, boy. Only humility can close it." Edom watched them walk away, their words echoing in his head. Nothing else had worked, not boasting, not ignoring the signs, not pretending everything was normal. For the first time in his adult life, Edom decided to listen to voices wiser than his own. That afternoon, he walked the dusty path to the village shrine. The shrine stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by ancient trees and scattered with offerings of kola nuts, palm wine, and carved figures. The diviner was an old man with hands like twisted roots and eyes that seemed to see through time itself. Without speaking, the diviner picked up 4 kola nuts and dropped them onto a woven mat. Each nut cracked in exactly the same pattern, something that should have been impossible. The old man studied the nuts for a long time, his face growing more serious with each moment. "Your lamp offended the night," he whispered finally, his voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "You lit fire during sacred darkness and saw what was not meant for human eyes." Edom's mouth went dry. "What can I do?" "Work will cool the anger. You must repay those you have wronged with your pride. Plant seedlings to replace what you have taken. Sleep on the ground for 7 nights to remember your place." The diviner gathered the broken kola nuts. "And you must mean every action, not just perform it. The forest can tell the difference between real change and empty gestures." Edom tasted dust in his mouth as he nodded. "Begin tomorrow," the diviner said. "And remember, some doors, once opened, can only be closed from the inside." The next morning, Edom wrapped himself in his oldest, plainest cloth. Gone were the bright colors and proud swagger. He moved through the village like a man carrying invisible weights. First, he went to the house of Okon, the tapper whose business had suffered because of Edom's unnatural success. "I have come to work for you," Edom said simply, bowing his head. "I will carry your water and pound your yam." Okon stared in amazement. The proud king of women stood on his doorstep offering to be a servant. House by house, Edom continued his rounds. He carried water for the women who had called him handsome. He repaired the cracked mortar he had once mocked as ugly. He swept compounds and tended fires without being asked. The villagers watched in silence, waiting to see if this humility was real or just another performance. At one house, he had feared to approach most of all, the home of the woman whose marriage proposal he had rejected cruelly months before. His knocks on her door made his heart race with shame. To his surprise, the door opened by itself before his hand could strike it again. The woman stood there with forgiveness in her eyes, and Edom realized that his true punishment had always been the weight of his own pride. On the ridge overlooking the village, Edom began the hardest work of his life. For every palm tree he had ever tapped for wine, he planted 10 small seedlings. The soil was hard and rocky, and each hole had to be dug by hand under the blazing sun. His palms blistered and bled. His back ached from bending over the stubborn earth. Sweat poured into his eyes and stung like tears. But something strange happened as he worked. The soil began to feel cooler under his fingers, as if the earth was welcoming the new trees. Ants crawled over his bare arms at night, but instead of biting, they seemed to be teaching him patience through their gentle touch. Days passed. His hands grew tough with calluses. His shoulders grew strong from lifting and digging. The jealous girls who had mocked his wife ran out of laughter as they watched Edom work from sunrise to sunset without complaint. Most mysteriously, the crickets slowly began to return to the village. First one, then a few, then whole choruses singing through the evening darkness. And sometimes, late at night, Edom could swear he heard them chirping his name, not with mockery, but with something that sounded almost like approval. The forest was watching his work, and slowly beginning to trust him again. On the 8th night, Edom gathered 3 symbolic objects and walked to the shrine. He carried an empty gourd to represent his pride emptied out. He brought an unknotted rope to show his willingness to be unbound from his old ways. In his other hand, he held a strip of bark carved with apologies to every person and spirit he had wronged. The diviner waited in the flickering candlelight, his ancient eyes reflecting the flames. Without words, Edom placed the empty gourd before the altar. He set down the unknotted rope on a flat stone. The bark strip he offered with both hands. The diviner took the rope and tried to tie it around the stone, but it slipped off again and again, as if refusing to bind anything. "The spirits are not ready to bind you yet," the old man said. "They are still testing the truth of your change." Edom felt his heart sink, but the diviner held up one weathered hand. "This is not failure, young man. This is patience. Keep going with your work. When your heart is truly changed, the rope will hold." As Edom walked home through the darkness, he felt lighter despite the disappointment. For the first time in months, he was not afraid of what tomorrow would bring. "Keep going," he whispered to himself, and the words felt like a prayer. Edom's transformation became visible to everyone in the village. He hung his rope in the central square where any person could borrow it freely. No longer did he keep the best tools for himself. When young boys came asking to learn palm wine tapping, Edom taught them first to plant seedlings before cutting mature trees. "Take care of the forest," he would say, "and it will take care of you." He shared his wine gourds without keeping the sweetest portions for himself. When customers came to buy, he let them choose first while he took whatever remained. The old women of the village, who had watched his pride and fall with knowing eyes, now nodded with approval as he passed. "The boy has learned," they whispered to each other. "The village breathes easier." Children who had once hidden from his loud boasting now ran up to help him carry water and hold his tools. Their laughter filled the spaces where his arrogant shouts used to echo. But late at night, when the village settled into sleep, those with keen ears could still hear something stirring at the boundary of the settlement. The trees that marked the edge of their land creaked and groaned like old doors swinging in an unfelt wind, as if something large was still deciding whether to stay or go. Change spread through the village like ripples on water. The maidens who had once mocked Edom's mysterious wife began approaching her with curiosity instead of spite. They asked for her recipes, wondered about her silence, and tried to understand her gentle ways. Edom's wife smiled, a small, green curve like a new leaf unfurling, and began teaching them simple wisdom. "Feed the birds first," she would say, scattering grain from her palm. "They have been waiting all night." The girls learned to listen to the sounds of the forest, to read the patterns of clouds, to move through the village with gentleness instead of gossip. As their hearts softened, the entire village square seemed to grow wider, as if its invisible walls had stepped back to make room for more kindness. Edom watched these changes with wonder. His wife had been teaching others the same lessons she had tried to teach him, but he had been too proud to learn. Now, walking through the market, he didn't try to catch the leaves that brushed his shoulders. He let them fall naturally, understanding that not everything in the world needed to be grasped or controlled. The jealous whispers that had once followed him everywhere were replaced by respectful nods and genuine smiles. But the real test of his change was still coming. The harvest season brought its traditional dance and celebration. This was when the proudest men would normally boast of their achievements and compete for attention. The entire village gathered in the square, drummers playing rhythms that made hearts dance. Young men began calling out their accomplishments, each trying to outdo the others. All eyes turned to Edom. Would the former, king of women, return to his old ways now that he had an audience? Edom stood slowly and walked to the center of the circle. The drums quieted, and every person held their breath. Instead of a boast, he offered a proverb: "A man who crowns himself king of women will eat yam without soup." Laughter erupted, not mocking laughter, but the kind that releases months of held breath. The wisdom was simple but true, and everyone understood that Edom was laughing at his former self. Then he did something that shocked everyone. He walked to where his wife sat with the other women and bowed deeply in front of the entire village. "Thank you," he said simply, "for your patience with a foolish man." For the first time since their wedding, his wife lifted her eyes to meet his directly. In her gaze, he saw something that made his heart race, not with desire, but with recognition of something vast and important. The next morning brought an unexpected threat to the village. Carts with iron teeth, machines for cutting trees, rolled toward the sacred grove at the village boundary. Men with official papers claimed they had permits to clear the forest for farmland. The village elders gathered quickly, their faces grave with worry. The grove had protected their people for generations. It was where their ancestors were buried, where the spirits lived, and where the rains were called from during dry seasons. Edom looked at the machines and felt something stir in his chest, not pride this time, but responsibility. He gathered the market women, the boys he had been teaching, and the village elders. Together, they went to meet the men with permits. "This land is sacred," Edom explained calmly. "These trees are the lungs of our village." They spoke of law and lineage, of common sense and ancient rights. The permit holders argued back, waving their official papers like weapons. But as the debate continued, something mysterious began happening to the machines. Thick vines started growing over the cart wheels, weaving through the iron teeth of the tree cutters. By morning, the equipment was so tangled in green growth that it couldn't move. The permit looked as thin as cobweb against the power of the forest defending itself. A messenger arrived the next day with a threatening whisper: "The chief's nephew will have your back bent for this defiance." Edom felt fear crawl up his spine, but he had learned to choose courage over comfort. Standing before the chief's nephew, a man known for his cruelty and greed, Edom offered a bargain that showed his new wisdom. "Take my harness and my labor," he said. "I will build you a new footpath around the grove that will serve travelers better than a straight road through sacred ground." The nephew's eyes glittered with the possibility of free labor, and his pride was satisfied by having the former, king of women, work as his servant. "Build the path," the nephew agreed. "But if you fail to complete it properly, your punishment will be severe." Edom bowed and accepted the terms. The village kept its trees, and more importantly, kept its temper. No blood was shed, no families were torn apart by conflict. As Edom began work on the winding footpath, he realized that protecting others felt better than any praise he had ever received. The grove stood safe, and the spirits within it had watched him choose the welfare of many over the comfort of one. This was the test he hadn't even known he was taking. Weeks of hard labor later, Edom discovered that his palm wine tapping had returned, but with new conditions. When he cut the trees now, the sweet sap flowed again, humming with life. But only if he shared the first gourd before taking his own sip. If he tried to drink first, the wine turned sour in his mouth like vinegar. If he let others lift the gourd to his lips before he tasted it, the wine was sweeter than honey. This pattern taught him faster than any words could have. The forest was showing him that abundance came through sharing, not hoarding. His customers returned, drawn by the quality of wine that surpassed even his previous supernatural success. But now they came with respect rather than simple desire for his product. Children helped him carry gourds without being asked. Elders stopped to share wisdom as he worked. Women offered him food and water during the hot afternoon hours. Edom realized that this new life, built on humility and service, was infinitely richer than his old existence built on pride and boasting. But late at night, when he lay on his sleeping mat, he sensed that the biggest revelations were still waiting. His wife would smile mysteriously when she thought he wasn't looking, as if she knew secrets that would change everything. Under the ancient baobab tree on a night when the moon hung full and silver, the air suddenly shimmered and opened like a curtain being drawn back. Edom's breath caught in his throat as a figure stepped forward from the light. Tall, majestic, with eyes like deep forest pools and skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. She was clearly not human, but something far older and more powerful. This was the protecting goddess of the grove, the one his wife had been serving all along. "When you lit the midnight lamp," the goddess said, her voice like wine through ancient trees, "you cracked a hidden doorway. Your bed became a threshold to the grove." Edom's wife stood beside the goddess now, and for the first time, he could see her clearly for what she truly was, not a human maiden, but the goddess's youngest daughter, sent to teach him wisdom. "You invited me past that door," his wife explained gently. "Since then, your breath has been tied to the forest's breath. Your pride created the hinge that opened the way between worlds." Edom's mind reeled as he understood the truth. His boasting had torn a hole between the human and spirit worlds. His wife had come through that hole to heal what his arrogance had damaged. "But your humility," the goddess continued, "can be the lock that keeps both worlds safe." Everything made sense now, the strange signs, the supernatural luck, the tests and trials. The goddess reached into the folds of her shimmering robes and withdrew a small seed that glowed like a captured star. As she held it, Edom could hear his own heartbeat echoing from within it. "This is the child of your union," she said softly. "Not a human child, but a living covenant between your village and the forest spirits." With trembling hands, Edom accepted the glowing seed. It was warm and pulsed with life, beating in rhythm with his own heart. He knelt in the village square and planted the seed in the exact center. Immediately, roots raced outward like silver lightning, and a ring of young palm trees sprouted in a perfect circle around the square. "These trees will flow with wine only when your people live with humility and respect," the goddess explained. "They are your village's promise to honor the balance between human needs and nature's wisdom." His wife, the forest daughter, stepped forward and touched his face gently. "I must return to the grove now, not as your bedmate, but as your people's guardian. Our marriage was never about love between two people, it was about creating a bridge between two worlds." The goddess placed her hand on Edom's shoulder. "You are no longer the king of women. You are the warden of the covenant, sworn to protect this balance forever." As dawn broke, the spirits faded back to the forest, leaving Edom with his new purpose. From that day forward, whenever anyone in the village grew too proud, an old mother would smile and say, "Mind your lamp after midnight, some brides are leaves in a dress."